Hello, I'm Andy Schmuckler. Yeah. One might say that my mission in life is to convey a way of understanding the human story that suggests that the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large. Uh, this isn't the place where I'm going to try to show that. On my website, I show it more than once in a variety of ways. abetterhumanstory.org. Uh, Rather, I want to address one of the obstacles that I've discovered there are to my ability to convey this better human story. And that is the belief that, well, if human beings were doing these things and they produced the world that we're living in, how can it not be human nature writ large? How can it not be a reflection of what we are inherently as creatures? And there are ways of showing that, which basically has to do with systemic forces. And but a previous YouTube about trampling tried to use that as a metaphor for how a systemic situation can lead to a result which is not reflective of who the human beings are that were in that situation, but that the range of choice gets so circumscribed by circumstance that that dictates what people do. There are not a room full of tramplers, and then there's a fire and wrong arrangements and people get trampled to death. It wasn't because there was a room full of tramplers. It was because of the structure of the situation. If they had like we school kids had a pre-designed evacuation plan, like we used to rehearse in elementary school, that if there's a drill, a fire drill, we, in an orderly fashion, file out of the room. That is a different situation with the same species as in the nightclub where people get burned, panic and try to escape the fire and end up trampling one another to death. And then I'd like to provide another way of looking at how it is that what you see in a creature's civilization as it evolves isn't necessarily representative of their nature. And that starts with a famous and somewhat infamous, actually, psychological study done at the University of Wisconsin by a guy named Harlow, I think back in the 1950s. And what this guy did is he separated newborn rhesus monkeys from their mothers and divided them into two groups, one of whose needs for comfort were met and one of whose needs for comfort were not met. I won't go into the details of it, but that's the essence of it. And the consequence is that even though both groups were deprived of real mothering, the ones that had their comfort needs at least minimally met developed into adult rhesus monkeys who could function in rhesus monkey society. The ones that got no comfort, their mothers were made of wire mesh or something you couldn't cuddle up to. They ended up being really messed up. They were incapable of rhesus social interaction. They were incapable of mating behaviors, and so that okay. So what that plus shows is that if you have a creature that's in an environment that's that's injurious to it, you can end up with these pitiful rhesus monkeys that don't grow up to be okay. Uh, and those monkeys, is that rhesus, inherent rhesus nature writ large? No, no, it's not. It's because they're in an unnatural situation that injures them and renders them kind of broken. Now, we're not that broken, we civilized human beings, uh, for the most part, anyhow. Um, but the idea that shows that human nature is not being manifested in the ugliness we see in human history and the ugliness we see in the world around us, that at least can be plausibly aligned with what we see about the failure of this rhesus monkey cohort that got none of its needs met. To be able to become at all what the rhesus monkey is born to be. I mean, the rhesus baby is born in the reasonable expectation that there will be a mother rhesus monkey nearby for this child, this infant, to be with and to grow into some form of manifesting rhesus monkey's nature. Well, um, to go a little bit into the substance of the idea that shows that there are systemic forces work. The systemic forces basically are that, first of all, that a civilization creating creature, when it steps onto the path of civilization, is leaving a natural order, entering into a disorder in which there will inevitably emerge a struggle for power and a war of all against all. And that in turn generates a selective process which says that only those cultural options that are conducive to prevailing in a war of all against all, and that's not random. Only those will survive and spread inevitably, not because of the nature of the creature, but if there's an inevitable war of against all, there will be a selection for certain cultural things. I call it selection for power, with power being all those power being the product of all those things about a society which determine whether it's a winner or a loser in the war of all against all. It's the consequence of anarchy. Anarchy is inevitably what civilization emerges into because it's brand new and there is no order there for it. So one can see readily that there are going to be two forms of brokenness that inevitably emerges from that. First of all, if there's going to be a war of all against all, and take a look at the monuments of the ancient world and the histories of the conquests and all that, if there's going to be a war of all against all, then you know that a lot of people are going to suffer a lot of traumatic stuff. Butchering other people is probably traumatic for people. And having oneself or one's loved ones or one's whole cities put to the sword. I mean, this is not a pretty picture. Hunter-gatherers never had to deal with that. So when people are plunged into this war of all against all, even if it was just that, that would be sufficient to result in people moving from this is our inherent nature into this is what happens to our inherent nature when we're in a society, in a world where marauding gangs are going through, or where whole armies clash in the struggle for power between empires, or whatever you want to say it was, as civilization emerged into this anarchy with the lack of any kind of order to make sure that what happens among the various players is part of a viable plan for the whole. No, this is just, there is no order. And that inevitably injures people. But there's a second way that people also get put into this rhesus monkey with the wire mothers that don't get their needs met. And that is the selection for the ways of power, in other words, the survival only of those who can survive in that war of all against all, leads to the dominant parts of society being of a particular sort and imposing on the human world that they rule to a large extent and control a set of demands that shape the culture that are that the young that are born into the society have to internalize, because that's how you fit into the society. And if the society is shaped by what can succeed in the war of all against all in the intersocietal system, rather than how do we best meet human needs within the system, to the extent to which that's true, people are going to have imposed on them and will internalize cultural demands that in turn were shaped by power. So in addition to the traumas that come simply from the war of all against all, there is the brokenness that comes from internalizing from one's society, which was shaped by power, a set of demands that were part of that what got selected for. Those societies that demanded of their members what it takes to maximize their power for that war of all against all, those societies will, as the centuries of millennia go through, they'll be the ones that get to send out the moral structures that people are required to internalize. And you can see a whole lot of that. The study of Victorian Europe is a good place to look for a whole lot of the repression, suppression, and general neurosis of people living in a society where the struggle for power had led to certain structures being imposed on people. That's why Freud's world looks the way it did to him. That's part of why, anyway. The superego and the id, the civilization and its discontents. Nietzsche saying the humans are a sick animal. Well, that's pretty much what's been going on throughout the history of civilization as the selection for power shapes societies. So the force being from the anarchic system where nothing's been put in place to make sure things go well, from the anarchic system to the societies to imposing on human beings, so that you look around at the human beings in our world, and what do you see? You see the products of this history in which the war of all against all mandated that the ways of power would have a disproportionate voice in shaping how civilization would survive, because there was a selective process that was inevitable and not a reflection of human nature. And living in these societies with our traumas, with our internalization of hostile forces that the society needs to impose or did impose and therefore succeeded in surviving the war of all against all, those pains make us not the wholeness of which we are born capable. Just like the rhesus monkey was evolved not to be complete all by itself, it was going to have a mother. 99.9% of the time, maybe more than that even, there would be a mother. And that mother would give it experiences, and those experiences would shape it, and it would become some reasonable facsimile of a rhesus monkey. Well, we too were evolved with the expectation that we'd be in a particular kind of an environment. Go back before the path of civilization, we're in hunting-gathering territory for a long time. In fact, you keep on following back into primate ancestors that we've got, and you've got a pretty much of a continuous thing. The hunter-gatherer is basically like the primates that evolved from in terms of the size, structure, and means of subsistence. It also has culture going on. It's not like, but there's a continuity there. And we are born with an expectation that there will be a world that sort of fits into whatever it was like for those hundreds of thousands of years when we had these cultural hunting-gathering ancestors. Whatever that was like was, one version of our inherent nature, let's say. I imagine if you took all the various bands and all the various cultures at that stage and looked at the totality of them, you would say, that's probably a pretty good picture of what we are by nature. I don't know exactly what that would show, but when we became the first creatures on this planet to extricate ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically by inventing our own way of life. And that's my definition of civilization. Extricating ourselves from the niche, which was part of the natural order. Well, inevitably, that will lead to a social evolutionary process, a selective process, which could be described as giving the spirit of the gangster a disproportionate voice on how that creature's civilization will evolve. I say that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that steps onto the path of civilization, whatever that looks like on that planet with that creature, it will inevitably unleash something of the same destructive, selective process that enshrines the spirit of the gangster as a big part of the face of its civilization, whether or not the spirit of the gangster had a whole lot to do with the inherent nature of that creature. Like with the rhesus monkeys. The trampling metaphor comes in because of the war of all against all, that nobody's in a position to stop. So people are sort of in a your money or your life kind of situation. And like with trampling, it's either trample or be trampled, or both. But here with the rhesus monkey, it's also to say, human nature isn't what we have thought it to be. When we look out on the world around us, in which people like Putin and Trump and Netanyahu and Xi are playing a disproportionate, they're playing a big role. People like that. Well, I know a lot of people. They are not typical. There is a selective process for the spirit of the gangster is given a disproportionate voice in shaping the civilization. And if that's true, the world around us and the history that leads up to this world don't show our inherent nature, at least in significant measure. It doesn't show our nature. Our nature does express itself in various ways. Even the rhesus monkeys who have been deprived, I'm sure, are behaving like rhesus monkeys in some gross ways. But we are a bit like the rhesus monkeys. And we should know that we are better creatures than we appear. I have been giving thought to what is human nature, well, in these terms, quite seriously since 1970. I think I was overly optimistic at some points, but it's still a very open question for me, just what kind of creatures we are. It turned out that chimpanzees were not as benign as it appeared to be in the 1970s. We've learned some other things. So maybe we got maybe more of the nature red in tooth and claw in us than I originally thought. But my better human story also provides a completely intellectually defensible, as far as I can see, from an evolutionary perspective, way of saying that there are moral and spiritual passions that are part of our inherent nature, that their being there means that it was selected for as we evolved from whatever starting point you want into the creatures we are now, that there are moral and spiritual passions that are sort of within us, that were selected for because clearly having them helped our ancestors to survive in comparison with those of that genetic pool that didn't have those. And if it helped them to survive, we can conclude that those passions, if we agree that they're there, must have been life-serving. At least life-serving while we were still in the niche in which we evolved biologically. So there are challenges about how do you translate these moral and spiritual passions. But I think there are solutions to them, to those things, that we do have within ourselves something more positive that is proof. Its positiveness is proved by the fact that it got selected for, meaning it helped life get itself into the future. And I think that I think that there is a great deal that's there within us that doesn't have to change because we've changed our situation so much. But what does need to change is our understanding. Hunter-gatherers didn't understand what the hell they were dealing with. They just did it because their ancestors had done it. You do what you do because that's what has worked to get you into the future. We're not in that situation. We're in a situation where civilization has been out of control, inevitably. And it's not yet in control, as Putin shows, as climate change shows. And we have the challenge to get things to go the way they need to go for the sake of life. We got to understand what we're dealing with in a way the hunter-gatherers didn't. And I've devoted my life to trying to do that in a way that actually might be helpful. And so that's what the motivating force of this series is. Yes, there are forces at work. They are the consequence of the nature of the system in which we operate. They are connected with things like Donald Trump getting elected to the presidency. It is connected with what we got to do if we're going to survive on this planet for the long haul, rather than destroy ourselves. So one of the things I'm doing is trying to offer something to people who want to keep fighting the fight, but don't want to look very much of the time at the ugliness that's going on because of the decision the American people made. That bizarrely, utterly wrong decision the American people made in the 2024 election. The nature of the brokenness that inevitably requires us to investigate is a really important question. There's some important ways in which we rhesus babies have been influenced by our environment to get really misfitted for the cause of life, unable to deal with rhesus monkey communications properly, unable to get ourselves into the future in any healthy way, just like those poor rhesus monkeys. So the circumstance can warp the picture. Understanding that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be can be one of the steps in being able to bring this thing under control. And another is to look at that force that got unleashed and the way it works, and how that is represented in the battle between democracy and fascism in America and worldwide. See the battlefield more clearly, be more effective in fighting it. Thanks. I'm Andy Schmuckler. I invite you to subscribe which encourages me. And I invite you to go to abetterhumanstory.org. If you think that if all that could be shown, you'd want to know, go there and see if it's shown. Thank you. Bye-bye.